Hello and welcome to the NVR Podcast, Season 2, Episode 8. I'm Rachael Aylmer.
Hi, and I'm Tony Meehan.
And today we are talking about vigilant care in schools. No surprise about that one, Tony.
No, not at all.
I guess it would be really nice to introduce yourself again for anyone who hasn't listened to our previous podcast focusing on education in NVR.
Yeah, I've been 30 years in teaching, 10 of which were head of a pupil referral unit. And my background has taken me from, nice leafy schools to pupil referral unit. And I feel my experience then has led me to the point where I need to find something else, something different in terms of managing really challenging behaviour. And I found that with nonviolent resistance when I was working in the pupil referral unit, and I found it as something that I really feel needs to be, well, to be honest with you, just put out there as a philosophy, as an alternative to what is already out there in terms of behaviour management. And I don't mean just for the most challenging pupils, I think for everyone.
For everyone. It's, across the board.
Yeah.
Tony, we've had a little prep before we started recording this morning, and you were really passionate about today's title, Vigilant Care in Schools. Can you say a bit more? What does that mean?
Well, the thing I need to say before we start, Rachel, I am not criticising schools in general. Okay. There is a climate at the moment where schools are under extreme pressure in order to deliver outcomes, academic outcomes. And they fall back on approaches which I think they are wedded to over time in terms of behaviour management. And I think an awful lot of this can be damaging to a lot of young people. But the pressures they are under means they need to react in a manner which, as I said, are not in tune with how the lives of some of the young people that they are teaching. Vigilant care, to me, represents a very straightforward a state of mind. It's a mindset, I think, and it just, as in terms of descriptions, like we're talking about open attention, and this is simply about being a responsible adult in the context of young people with a variety of needs and being gently alert to anything that might be out of place. And it's different to approaches in that one is not looking for things that are going wrong. You're not looking for what's going wrong. You're simply, as I say, gently alert. And it gives staff the freedom and autonomy to decide for themselves what constitutes unacceptable behaviour and might then require a response to deal with the behaviour, but also might allow the teacher to ask, okay, what's going on for this child here? And what I think is very important to recognise is teachers are tier 1 mental health practitioners. And I think the Vigilant Care framework fits that nicely and allows them to move on to open attention then. So they might pick up that there's something going on, but it's that curiosity and then have a conversation or refer it on. And then, of course, the last element of it is the protective action to really engage with others around the child to make sure the needs of the child are met in that moment. So it's not just to see the behaviour as something that needs punishing. Does that make sense?
It does. And I'm just thinking about maybe somebody who might listen to this who is currently working in education provision.
Yeah.
And they may hear all that, perhaps not knowing anything more about NVR, and say, yeah, we do that already. And so how does that fit with the principles of NVR, the Vigilant Care?
I think in terms of vigilant care, what I like about non-violent resistance, let's move to non-violent resistance, because I think a non-violent resistance in itself provides a really powerful process to address a lot of the behaviours that may be manifested by a child. First of all, we talked about the curiosity and the response within, that. But then you're talking about, okay, what do we do if we can't punish, if we don't have these measures in place? What do we do? And this is when we talk about, creating a climate in a school that allows for that to happen. So, for instance, we talk about de-escalation, striking the irons cold. Sorry, I nearly said hot. As we know. And this allows a teacher or any member of staff in a school to remain curious, but also to be prepared to intervene in a manner that's not going to escalate the situation. So we talk about how, and some teacher might say, well, if they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing, surely there's got to be a response. And my argument to that is, well, no, there are ways of stepping back with strength and ways of stepping back because you've been forced to step back because the behaviour of the child is such that you cannot manage it and you've been forced to step back. So this is about the autonomy of the teacher or support member of staff in the moment to make a decision, either to step in and know that there's going to be an escalation, or how to step back to allow the situation to develop and then get support for that child. So, I mean, that sounds a bit waffly, and it's not. I'm not being more. And I it's very hard to pin it down. And I also said to you this morning, my thinking around this is I'm struggling with my thinking. And it's something like I say to my parents when I meet them first time. I often say to them, "And now for something completely different." And I had to look that up. But where did that's a phrase, and where did that come from? And of course, it came from Monty Python in the 70s. And I remember we used to think Monty Python was absolutely fantastic, unbelievable, funny, hilarious. You look at it today and you think, not sure we get away with that today, but you know what I mean? But at the time, it was something completely different. And I think NVR is something completely different. And I would like to think it will become the norm.
The norm. That would be amazing. Listen, I'm just thinking about Vigilant Care and I'm thinking about teacher presence. How do those two sit with each other? What's your thoughts on that?
I think the idea of teacher presence obviously is, we know presence is the thing we look for in NVR, the central thing we try to build up in parents. And where teachers have presence and young people feel secure around them. I talked a lot about this in the last podcast. They feel that security around them. But the teacher needs to know they are part and parcel of a shared set of values and beliefs that allow them to respond in the most appropriate manner rather than reacting in a punitive manner, because that's what the behaviour policy tells them they need to do. Now, Rachel, there's risk in this.
Yeah.
There's risk in this. And that's why I made a reference to Monty Python, because it was risky of its time. I think NVR is risky in terms of saying, let's go with this, because the mindset is different. You're giving teachers autonomy, the ability to think for themselves, but also to draw in support. Now, the thing when we work with parents, we talk a lot about presence, and we talk about the systemic presence, the support. We talk about embodied presence, being anxious but owning your anxiety, and then knowing that you got support around you. So the process of presence could be one of just growing presence over time. I would love to have a school where we'd say, can you teach? Do you know how to teach? Are you, as a professional, what is required, what pedagogy is required for you to be a successful teacher. I said, right, here's how we will support you with behaviour. And I know there's a colleague of mine who has a school where when she started, there was a lot of shouting, and she just changed the culture because there was a tendency for teachers to fall back on tried and tested approaches with shouting, which were ineffective. It might have terrified maybe 2/3 of the class, but another third were sort of found this, okay, if that's how you want to play it, let's go with this. So, and she told me, like, people looked at her as if to say, well, what do you want me to do? And I said, manage it and we will support you. But this is not got to stop. And I said this the last time when I was at the crew. I knew what I didn't want to do, but it took me time to work out what I was going to do. And that may sound like there might be chaos in the interim. I won't say it wasn't an easy time. It was an easy time. It was difficult. But slowly but surely, we changed the culture. And I think that's one of the things we would need to be looking at in terms of NVR and Vigilant Care. What is the climate at the school that exists at the moment? I think I've wandered off your question, Rachel. I don't even in there. I may have answered the question, but you know,
you did. I think I asked that question because this morning I nipped out and passed a couple of secondary schools at the 8:30 time and saw the kids going in, and I passed quite a big school in my area, and there were two teachers outside the entrance gate, with a brolly. It was raining, it was cold, blowy and windy. And as I sat in the traffic watching these teachers greet the kids as they came in, that vigilant care, that open attention, that that teacher presence, that for me, it was really symbolic, being welcomed into it's almost like that welcome to my home, welcome, come on in. This is good to see you today, Johnny. Good to see you, Anne, whoever. Good morning. How are you? Teacher presence, vigilant care, vigilant open attention. For me, it was just such a symbolic.
And you asked the question, and I don't think I answered it, but I'm going to hopefully do it now. But you asked the question, how, about those teachers, what would they say? I think a lot of schools do it, and they have a nurturing environment. And I think what I would like to do, though, is capture. I think Vigilant Care captures all of those nurturing aspects of what goes on in inclusive schools, and says, here we go. Now, here's your framework. Here's your thinking. It validates what they're already doing. But also, and I found this I was in a school last week, I think, or the week before. I found this talking to teachers where it suddenly clicks. And all I'm saying I actually said to the teacher, I said, you don't need me here. You're doing it. But you don't know that you're doing it.
Yeah.
And I was able to say, okay, your presence is growing because of this. You've done this. And one of the things I found most interesting was where they had a member of staff who was quite anxious around the children, a support member of the staff, quite anxious around the children. And they supported this member of the staff by literally sitting down. He said, the children pick up on your anxiety. So they had that understanding. I said, it's okay. It's okay to feel anxious, but we're here to support you. And having that conversation alone drew that member of staff into the wider support network, that sense of, I don't have to manage this on my own. There are people there. No, talk about it. Let us know. What is it you're feeling anxious about? Okay, I'll come in and let's observe what's going on. I'm not observing you. I'm observing what's going on. And what was really powerful listening how appreciative that member of staff felt because that member of staff did not realise that she was anxious in such a way that was affecting the children. So I suppose what I'm saying is with Vigilant Care is many schools are doing it, and it's not something that's rocket science, but it is difficult really to encapsulate. And I think Vigilant Care does it in such a way you can say, this is what we're looking at. Think about that. Now, that will provoke conversations forever, because some people will say, no way, because where's the punishment in there? Where's the consequences, etc.?
Punishment or consequences? I mean, we could talk about that for about another 4 hours, Tony.
Well, I just want to say one thing briefly on that. NVR and Vigilant Care, this is not a soft option. We're not talking about no authority. We're talking about new authority. And there are responses to everything. And I think the distinction between sanctions, punishments, and the word responses is critical, because that allows you then to sit down. What do we need to do here? How are we going to respond? And sometimes this might involve a response that requires the child to do some restorative action. But I spoke to a friend of mine who runs a school, and I loved this. Can I read this out? This is his behaviour policy. Can I give a shout out to Toby in Hong Kong?
Toby in Hong Kong. My daughter's in Hong Kong. Grace and Toby in Hong Kong.
And he's the head of a school there. And I love this. Sorry, it goes on for a bit. Our conviction as a school is that for 95% of the time and for 95% of students, deviations from behaviour for learning can be resolved through informal conversation and counselling. Research and our own experience suggest that timely, sympathetic and constructive intervention is most effective and can usually obviate the need for any formal procedures to be put in place. Implicit in this is the knowledge that oftentimes behavioural conduct is the only voice students have to express themselves. Our role as teachers is to provide students with alternative ways in which to do this successfully. As teachers, we should be mindful of the fact that we are setting up a significant part of our students' worlds, and that this needs to be done with guidance, patience, and understanding. Now, that is not Vigilant Care. I don't know what is. It's all there. And I think this is the issue, So, that's how I see Vigilant Care playing out. Can I just go on to families? Because I think in terms of where this sits, you asked the last podcast, do parents, families have a role in this? And of course they do. But I think what we found, and I certainly found with NVR and Vigilant Care, is that it offers the opportunity to involve parents in such a supportive, mutually beneficial manner, because the quality of the conversations are completely different.
Yeah.
And I love the idea in Haim Omer talks about involving, factually reporting what has happened. So to say something goes wrong in the school, very often kids are put on report. I remember as a head of year, children going on report. Hated it because I was responsible. So you had red, amber and green report. So red, the serious stuff. And the child had to navigate a week of 6 classes a day. And if one of those was, they failed one of those, they were on report the next week. You can see what was happening here.
Yeah.
I knew it was like this. There's a minefield here. I mapped the child's day for the week, and I knew exactly where they would fail because of the approaches taken by individual members of staff. And so I think, looking for something completely different. And what I love, what Chaim Aylmer says at some stages, I can't remember where, but, having a child, a member of staff, report back to the parent on a daily basis for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, reporting factually, without emotion, what they have seen or heard. But also, you're not expecting the parent to do anything about it. You're requiring the parent to register with the child that I heard from the school, this happened. End of conversation. Because you're not there to fix the child and blast the child and send them back fixed for school the next day. So that's what I'm seeing as the difference between the old style approach of reports, guaranteed failure, repeat a use of punitive measures, and the Aylmer approach of communication. This is happening. And at some stage, we may need to come together to discuss the way forward, how we can support each other mutually.
I love that. And I, just going back to referencing what you said about many schools may still be operating in old authority. Yeah. And NVR brings about change and introduces a new authority, because teacher authority, just like parent authority, is crucial for a child's stability to thrive and flourish. And, alongside that is that teacher and parent presence. Alongside that is then the systemic presence. And so it continues. And I wonder what it might be like for a teacher or a support staff working in a school where there is old authority, but you are trying to practice new authority, and the struggles for a teacher to be in amongst that environment. Just like a parent, maybe where there is a family of two parents and one parent is operating on another level to the other parent, and the struggles and barriers that brings. I'm just wondering if you could say any more, Tony, about.
Well, I could say, how long have we got? Okay, because it is the I mean, where you have. Okay, here's how I see it. That member of staff who has a new authority head on, but all around them is old authority. And the belief then is that if you switch out or switch off old authority, you have no authority and there will be mayhem. No, I think that's nonsense as long as you shift over into new authority. And that's where NVR offers a genuine alternative, because it's a mindset, it's a philosophy. It offers strategies that work. We know they work. But to that person, that lone person, I would be looking around. On my radar would be looking for other people of like mind who might be in the school, and there will be others of like mind. And I found this, Rachel, when I was in some schools. I did a presentation some years ago where, it was like I presented NVR to the school, and if the tumbleweed could have been wafted across that hall after the end of it, it would have. Such was the hostility I felt. But what was really interesting at the end of that was some very young members of staff sidled up to me and wanted to know more. But they were literally looking over their shoulder to see who was watching them.
Building those alliances.
Yes, and they wanted to know more because what ran the school effectively was the behaviour policy, which was set in stone. And if this happened, this has to be the consequence. If this happened, this has to be the consequence. And I think they were sensing here's a different approach. I of course I gave out my email address. Happy to have a conversation and that. And more, I think there is a need for something different, because we cannot go down the punitive route. There's a great quote from a guy called Paul Dix, who's written a brilliant book, and the title of it says it all. When the adults change, everything changes. And he's been in detention all week, and his behaviour is still appalling.
Wow! Didn't that learn him?
So that's what we're moving away from. I think we've got here an approach, a systematic approach that is not soft. We know it's not soft. I'll tell you where it's hard, Rachel, for those being introduced to NVR for the first time. Those moments where they have to make a stand. Your session with Sheila the other week was making a stand.
Yeah.
And the making a stand, it comes when there is behaviour you might have to manage, and I am making a stand. But you don't do it alone. To all intents and purposes, it may look as if you're alone because you're withstanding some abuse that may come at you. But then the cavalry comes, the support comes, it arrives, and then all of a sudden you're not alone. As with Rosa Parks, she knew she was doing something that risked arrest, but it was embedded in an approach, a philosophy, a set of beliefs, and there were many, many others there to support. So that point at which you take a stand, that's the bit where you need real courage and conviction.
And that taking a stand, for somebody listening, might think, yeah, it's like rolling up your sleeves and heading over and increasing your
physical pressure.
But what we're describing is something quite different.
Absolutely. It's pre-planned action. I know this is going to happen. And
this is my choice. This is what I am going to do.
And I think Chaim Omer described a situation where a particular year group was being difficult. And they made an announcement to the year group. But all of a sudden, all of the members of the faculty arrived into the hall where it was having. A lot of parents arrived in. And all had been briefed as to what was going to happen. And their presence registered, we are with the school on this. We are with the teacher on this. And that is where we have to check the climate of the school. What are the issues relating to the wider families, the wider community, spending time working with those families. The one thing I found really helped when I was went from mainstream into a pupil referral unit, was home visits. Now, you can imagine, Rachel, when I knocked on people's doors and the pupil answered it, and the look on their faces when I walked in, just come to see your mum, and been brought in for a cup of tea, having a chat, and then just going. It wasn't about talking about the behaviour or anything. I was offering support for the mums present, usually the mum, I'm afraid to say. And then the relationship was one of much greater, deeper level of trust. So there was no gap between home and school. The child knew, and I said, well, I'll be chatting to your mum later on about that. Are you sure about this? They knew that they weren't going to get away with that. So this is, again, increases the mutual presence, teacher, parent, the community, the presence rises, and then we are really protecting our children.
We talked about there was a newsreel that we found on YouTube from a school in a state in America.
I remember,
about sort of, I think it was about October, November last year, and I can put this link on the end of the podcast, where there were, Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, there were a group of about 42 dads.
42 dads, yeah.
Yeah, that had, the school were experiencing lots of violence in the break time, pre and after school, lots of young people really getting into some difficult situations, kids being arrested, ambulances being called, and the school brought about some change. And one of the biggest things that they brought about in change was the introduction of these dads, which I refer to as Dad's Patrol. And it was just dads. So that's a really interesting situation in itself. So one dad had led this proactive response and created a pool of 42 dads that took rotas to be in the school, around the school, at opening times, closing times, lunch times. What was your take on that?
Like, I looked at this and I thought, before I watched it, I thought, okay, I've got issues with this. But then I watched, and what I watched was the interview that they had with the news anchor, news person. And he asked them, so you have no qualifications, none, no. And the only qualifications for this role, that doesn't mean they didn't have qualifications, of course, was dads. And they were clearly, they didn't just rock up. They had spent time working out what they're going to be doing. And it was their mere presence. They knew not to intervene. They were simply there to lend support. They were waving, a lot of fist bumping, a lot of, a lot of dad jokes they made, and that was and that's similar to what I described earlier about the whole community coming together, not in a threatening way, but just to show we are present, we are supporting the school, and we are ready to take instruction from the school as to how to manage ourselves. Don't forget, NVR is about we can only control our own actions.
And I know that action, actually, the change that brought about was the children reflecting on how safe they felt.
Yeah.
The violence in the school pre and post lessons had stopped completely.
Yeah, completely.
There were no more police call-outs. Young people were feeling calmer and more connected to their lessons and their learning. Yeah. And when you look at that, you think, wow, that wasn't rocket science, was it?
No.
42 dads doing a different rota over a month to perhaps, offer 1 or 2 hours a month.
Yeah.
Where they could just be there.
And that's it. And I think it's the quality of the presence. When we engage supporters for families, the key thing is that they do nothing to undermine the parent. The parent calls the shots with regards to how their supporters respond to what might be happening. And this was clearly evident in that video. Those dads knew not to overstep the mark. They weren't telling people, like they might have said in a nice friendly way, guys, listen, let's go. But there was no sense of coercion or that they're to keep tough guys. This wasn't about being tough guy, nothing.
Right.
Presence, pure and utter. And the concept of presence has not really been taken into schools in a manner which I feel is structured enough. And I think we know from NVR, we work on presence, and it's very, very difficult to conceptualize.
Yeah.
But you have to keep looking for it. And I think that's the beauty of it. You keep having to build it, rebuild it. What's next? What constitutes a heightened presence? And I said to you before in a previous time, maybe it was the last time, we have those teachers who have it naturally. It's seemingly, but they have to work at that. They're secure in their own skins, and this is where their presence derives from. Their whole history, their whole growing up, the whole way they see the world. But that can be brought to other members of staff who are open to that way of thinking.
We've come to an end.
I was watching this time because the last time I think I looked at it, I thought, is that 25 minutes gone or 25 minutes to go? and it was actually 25 minutes gone. I thought, oh my God. Yeah. Anyway,
we'll make the podcast bite-sized. I'm hoping some people got some little nuggets of just piecing together their own understanding of the approach. I think for me, in summarising this little podcast discussion today, something you said right at the beginning about a mindset, about inviting somebody to be a part of that mindset, to begin to explore ways in which change can come about peacefully, but also with some purposeful action that is not harming another person, and that real definitive position of self-control. I am in charge of me, and I will maintain that position. This is my mindset. What about you? What was your summary?
I couldn't better that, Rachel. But I think you're right. Homing in on this is about me, and me in relation to other members of staff, other parents, the school, the wider community. How do I locate myself so that I feel utterly secure in myself, even when things are becoming difficult? There's a great saying, knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. And I think NVR gives you that.
Super. What we will do is we'll put a little link to that YouTube clip for anybody who wants to do that. Maybe a link to Paul Dix's book. And I don't know whether Toby would give you permission to share that behaviour statement, and we could put that.
Oh, he would.
Yeah? Oh, good. So there's some resources that we could plop on the end of the podcast. But otherwise, thank you. Thanks, Tony. We will do some more podcasts.
Oh, please. I've got 6 pages more to talk about.
Okay. Well,
great, Rachel.
Goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Thanks.